The message appeared in the family group chat at exactly 2:17 on a Thursday afternoon, right in the middle of my final walkthrough with the florist. I watched the notification banner slide across my screen, then another, then 3 more in rapid succession. My thumb hovered over the preview. Brandon's name sat at the top, followed by a string of laughing emojis from accounts I recognized. Mom, Dad, Aunt Helen, even cousin Jessica, who barely knew what was happening half the time, had added a crying laughing face. I opened the thread. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Can't believe I have to explain centerpieces to Maya, Brandon had written. Some people never grow past entry-level thinking. Thank God Lisa and I have real careers to fall back on. The message sat there like a stain on white fabric, impossible to ignore, designed to spread. Below it, my mother had written, well, she's doing her best with what she knows. My father added, at least she can help with the decorations. Aunt Helen chimed in with, everyone has their place, sweetheart. Brandon replied to that one with a thumbs up and another emoji. This time a party hat. I didn't type anything back. I locked my phone, set it face down on the marble counter of the venue's bridal suite, and returned my attention to the woman standing beside an arrangement of white peonies and eucalyptus. She was waiting for my approval on the arch design, the one that would frame Brandon and Lisa when they renewed their vows in exactly 9 days. The same arch Brandon thought he was getting at a steal because some generous venue owner had taken pity on his modest budget. He had no idea that generous owner was standing 3 feet away from those flowers, wearing jeans and a cashmere sweater, deciding whether or not to let him have his perfect day. I smiled at the florist. It looks perfect. Let's go with this design. She nodded, made a note on her tablet, and moved toward the door. I stayed behind for a moment, standing in the center of a room that cost more per night than most people made in a month. The Evergreen Estate. $4.8 million of pristine Oregon architecture, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking 30 acres of forest, and a reputation that made brides cry when their deposits got accepted. Brandon had bragged about booking it for months. He told everyone he knew someone who knew someone. He posted photos of the property on his social media, with captions about manifestation and hard work paying off. What he didn't know was that the someone he knew was me. And the reason he got the venue at all was because I owned it. 5 years ago, I was sleeping on Rachel Kim's couch in a studio apartment in the Hawthorne neighborhood, surviving on instant noodles and the occasional catering gig that paid cash under the table. I dropped out of the hospitality management program at Portland State halfway through my junior year, and the fallout was immediate. My father stopped calling. My mother called too much, always with the same question. When are you going back? Brandon, who was just starting to close his first major real estate deals, made sure everyone knew his little sister was a quitter. He'd bring it up at family dinners, always with a smile, always with just enough concern to make it sound like love. You know, Maya's still figuring things out. We're all rooting for her. The subtext was clear. She's a mess and I'm not. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just worked. I took every wedding coordinator position I could find, even the ones that paid next to nothing. I learned how to manage vendors, how to negotiate with venues, how to talk a panicking bride down from a meltdown over the wrong shade of blush pink. I learned about contracts, liability insurance, and how to make a tight budget look like luxury. I learned that people would pay anything, absolutely anything, to feel like their moment mattered. And I learned that the people running these venues, these beautiful estates that charged thousands of dollars for a single evening, didn't actually know how to run a business. They knew how to inherit property and cash checks. That was the gap I walked into. Rachel and I pooled everything we had. $35,000, most of it from my catering work and her savings from a job she hated at a tech startup. We didn't buy a venue right away. We started by managing events for other people, undercutting established planners, working holidays and weekends, building a reputation for being reliable and creative and worth the referral. Within 2 years, we had enough to make an offer on a struggling estate in Beaverton, a place that had been losing money for 3 years straight under owners who thought charm could replace competence. We turned it profitable in 8 months. Then we bought another property, then another. By year 4, we had 3 venues across the Portland metro area, and a team of 28 people who believed in what we were building. I named the company Milestone Events Group, And I used my mother's maiden name, Hartley, for all the public-facing branding. Milestone Events by Hartley. It sounded established, trustworthy, like it had been around for decades. Nobody questioned it. Nobody looked deeper. My family certainly didn't. When I told them I was working in event planning, they nodded politely and changed the subject. My mother would say things like, "That's nice, sweetie, as long as you're happy," in the same tone she used when I was 7 and announced I wanted to be an astronaut. My father asked once if I had health insurance. When I said yes, he seemed satisfied and never brought it up again. Brandon was the worst. He'd introduce me to his friends as his sister who does parties, always with air quotes around the word parties, always with a smirk that suggested I was one step away from selling balloon animals at children's birthday gatherings. I never corrected him. I never told him that the small party I'd coordinated the previous weekend had brought in $42,000 in revenue. I never mentioned that I'd just closed on my third property, or that my company was being courted by investors who saw the potential for regional expansion. I stayed quiet and I watched. The thing about being underestimated is that it gives you room to move. People don't guard themselves around you. They don't watch what they say. Brandon certainly didn't. Over the years, he'd made countless little comments, always in front of an audience, always designed to position himself as the successful sibling and me as the one who needed guidance. At our cousin's wedding 2 years ago, he'd pulled me aside and said, "You know, if you ever want to get serious about your career, I could introduce you to some people. I have connections in hospitality management. Real opportunities, not just freelance stuff." I'd thanked him, told him I'd think about it, and walked away before I said something I couldn't take back. That same weekend, I'd signed the contract to purchase the Evergreen Estate, the crown jewel of Portland event venues. A property so exclusive that it was booked out 18 months in advance and had a waitlist that people paid just to be on. Brandon had no idea. None of them did. When Brandon got engaged to Lisa 15 years ago, I was still in college, still trying to figure out what I wanted. I'd helped with some of the wedding coordination, small tasks like confirming vendor arrivals and setting up the guest book table. He'd thanked me in his speech, called me his little helper, and everyone had laughed. It was affectionate, I suppose, but it also set a tone. Maya helps. Maya assists. Maya is useful in the background. That narrative followed me for years and I never fought it. I didn't need to. I was too busy building something they couldn't see. When Brandon called me 6 months ago to tell me he and Lisa were planning a vow renewal for their 15th anniversary, I listened patiently as he described his vision. Something elegant, he said. Intimate but impressive. We want people to remember this. He told me they were looking at venues, trying to find something within budget that didn't feel cheap. He mentioned the Evergreen Estate, said it was a long shot but worth inquiring about. I told him I'd heard good things about that place. A week later he called back ecstatic. "You won't believe this, Maya. We got the Evergreen Estate. They had a last-minute cancellation and gave us an incredible discount. $15,000 for the full venue. Can you believe that?" I told him I was happy for him. I told him it sounded like everything was falling into place. I didn't tell him that preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Cancellation was fabricated, that the discount was fiction, that the venue manager who had called him with the good news reported directly to me. I didn't do it out of generosity. I did it because I wanted to see what would happen. I wanted to watch my brother plan the event of his dreams at a place he thought he'd earned through luck and charm, all while having no idea that his failure of a sister owned the ground he'd be standing on. I wanted to see if humility would find him somewhere along the way, if gratitude would soften the edges of his arrogance. It didn't. If anything, the venue booking made him worse. He started giving advice to other family members about negotiation tactics and persistence. He posted photos of the estate on social media with captions about believing in yourself and making things happen. He talked about the universe rewarding those who work hard and stay focused. He never once mentioned luck. He never once acknowledged that someone somewhere had extended him a kindness he didn't earn. The planning process was excruciating. Brandon tasked me with coordinating small details, things he considered beneath him but necessary. Centerpiece options, menu tastings, seating arrangements. He'd text me at odd hours with questions, never asking if I was busy, always assuming I was available. I answered every message. I confirmed every detail. I made sure his event would be flawless, not because I cared about his happiness, but because I wanted him to have everything he thought he deserved. I wanted the room to be perfect, the food to be impeccable, the flowers to be breathtaking. I wanted him to stand in the middle of his celebration, surrounded by everyone he loved, feeling like he'd made it. And then I wanted him to know the truth. The group chat message wasn't the first insult. It was just the loudest. Over the months of planning, Brandon had made dozens of comments, most of them casual, all of them cutting. He'd joke about my lack of a real office, implying I worked from coffee shops like a teenager with a laptop. He'd ask if I was still doing the party thing, as if it were a phase I'd eventually outgrow. He'd compare his career to mine in front of relatives, always positioning himself as the one who'd figured life out and me as the one still searching. Our parents never corrected him. They'd smile, sometimes awkwardly, and change the subject. Aunt Helen once said, "Everyone blooms at their own pace," which might have been kind if it didn't also imply I hadn't bloomed at all. I absorbed it. I let it build. And I waited for the right moment. The group chat message was that moment. It wasn't just dismissive. It was public, visible to 18 people, designed to humiliate me in front of the family while Brandon positioned himself as the patient older brother enduring my incompetence. The message sat there, accumulating reactions, becoming a shared joke. I read it 3 times, memorizing the exact phrasing, the precise tone. Then I opened my email and composed a message to David Wong, my attorney. The subject line read, "Contract revision required." In the body I wrote 3 sentences. Effective immediately, the Chum Martinez vow renewal event scheduled for June 14th is cancelled due to unforeseen venue complications. Please draft a formal notice and have it couriered to the client by end of business today. Include standard cancellation policy terms and refund processing timeline. I hit send before I could second guess myself. David called me within 20 minutes. "Maya, are you sure about this? The event is 9 days out." "I'm sure." He hesitated. "This is your brother. I know exactly who it is." Another pause. "If I send this, there's no taking it back. The deposits are non-refundable per the contract. He'll lose everything he's put in." Then he should have thought about that before he decided I wasn't worth basic respect. "Send it, David." I heard him exhale. "You're the boss. The notice will go out within the hour." I hung up and sat in my office on the 8th floor of a building in the Pearl District, looking out over a city that had watched me struggle and never offered a hand. The skyline was sharp against a gray sky, the kind of Pacific Northwest afternoon that felt like it could break into rain or sunshine without warning. My phone buzzed. Another message in the family group chat. Lisa had written, "Can't wait to see how everything comes together. Maya, you're a lifesaver." The irony was so thick I could taste it. The notice arrived at Brandon's house by courier at 4:30 in the afternoon. I didn't watch for his reaction. I didn't need to. I knew the sequence that would follow, the stages of realization that come when something you thought was guaranteed suddenly isn't. First would come confusion, the assumption that some mistake had been made. Then phone calls, frantic ones, to the venue's main line where a receptionist trained to handle difficult conversations would calmly explain that unfortunately, due to circumstances beyond their control, the event could no longer be accommodated. Then anger, the kind that demands to speak to someone higher up, someone with authority to fix this. That call would be transferred to our operations manager, who would apologize profusely while reiterating the terms of the contract Brandon had signed, the one that clearly stated deposits were non-refundable in the event of cancellation, regardless of which party initiated it. Then would come the bargaining, the promises of additional payment, the appeals to human decency, and finally the realization that none of it mattered. The decision was final. I was in a meeting with a potential client when my phone started vibrating. I glanced at the screen. "Brandon." I declined the call and returned my attention to the couple sitting across from me. A pair of nervous 20-somethings planning their wedding on a budget that required creativity and careful negotiation. They wanted something beautiful but couldn't afford the standard package pricing at any of our venues. I walked them through options, showed them how we could adjust timing to off-peak hours, how we could streamline certain services without sacrificing elegance. By the time they left, they were smiling, contract signed, deposit paid. My phone showed 6 missed calls from Brandon, 3 from my mother, and 2 from Lisa. The family group chat had 17 new messages, most of them variations of confusion and concern. I silenced the notifications and drove home. My apartment was nothing like what people expected when they learned I owned multiple properties worth millions. It was a modest two-bedroom in the Alphabet District, furnished simply, decorated with things that mattered to me rather than things that impressed guests. I'd bought it outright 3 years ago, paid in cash, and never told anyone in my family that I owned it. As far as they knew, I was still renting something small and making ends meet. The disconnect between their perception and my reality had become so vast that I sometimes felt like I was living two separate lives, one visible and struggling, the other hidden and flourishing. Tonight, sitting on my couch with a cup of tea, I let those two lives finally begin to merge. My phone rang again. Brandon. I answered this time. Maya, what the hell is going on? His voice was stretched tight, a thread about to snap. What do you mean? The venue. The Evergreen Estate just canceled our event. 9 days before the ceremony. 9 days. They're saying it's in the contract that we lose everything. This can't be legal. I'm so sorry to hear that. What happened? What happened? I don't know what happened. They sent some vague notice about unforeseen complications, and now they won't return my calls. Lisa is losing her mind. We have 150 people coming. We've paid for catering, for flowers, for a band. Everything was built around this venue. I sipped my tea, let the silence stretch. That sounds really stressful. Stressful? Maya, this is a disaster. We need to find another venue immediately. Do you know anyone who can help? I thought about the question, about the layers of irony embedded in him asking me, of all people, for help navigating a crisis in the industry I dominated. I know a few people. I can make some calls. You need to do more than make calls. You need to fix this. We're family. His tone had shifted from panic to demand, from asking for help to expecting it. The entitlement was so casual, so automatic, that I wondered if he even heard it in his own voice. I'll see what I can do, I said. But most venues book out months in advance. Finding something this last minute is going to be nearly impossible. Then make it possible. This is my 15th anniversary, Maya. This matters. I know it matters. I'm just being realistic about what's available. He exhaled sharply. Just figure it out. I have to go call the caterer and see if we can move things. He hung up without saying goodbye. I set my phone down and stared at the ceiling, tracing the path of a small crack in the plaster that I'd been meaning to have repaired for months. The crack had been there when I bought the place. I'd looked at it during the final walkthrough and thought about how easy it would be to fix, how a little bit of effort could erase the flaw entirely. I never did fix it. Some part of me liked knowing it was there. A small imperfection in an otherwise sound structure. A reminder that nothing is ever completely flawless no matter how much you invest in it. The family group chat exploded over the next few hours. My mother wrote a long message about how devastating this was for Brandon and Lisa, how they put so much effort into planning, how the whole family had rearranged schedules to attend. Aunt Helen posted a prayer emoji and a message about trusting in divine timing. Cousin Jessica shared a link to an article about wedding venue scams, implying without evidence that the Evergreen Estate might be running some kind of fraud operation. My father, who rarely posted in the chat, wrote simply, "This is unacceptable. Someone needs to be held accountable." I read every message, watching the narrative form in real time. Brandon was the victim. The venue was the villain. And I, by virtue of being the person who helped with small details, was expected to somehow salvage the unsalvageable. Lisa called me at 9 in the evening, her voice hoarse from crying. Maya, I don't know what to do. Brandon is barely speaking. He's just sitting in the garage staring at the wall. We've lost $12,000 in deposits and we have nothing to show for it. I'm so sorry, Lisa. I wish there was something I could have done to prevent this. You've been so helpful through all of this. I feel terrible that you got dragged into our mess. You didn't drag me into anything. I wanted to help. I know, but still. This whole thing is just so unfair. We did everything right. We booked early, we paid on time, we followed every rule. And now we're being punished for something that isn't our fault. She paused and I heard her blow her nose. Brandon keeps saying there has to be legal action we can take, but I just want to move forward. I just want to find another place and make this work. Do you think that's possible? I considered my response carefully. It's going to be challenging. Most quality venues are booked solid this time of year. You might have to compromise on location or date. We can't change the date. Everyone's already traveling. Family is flying in from 3 different states. I know. Then location is the variable. There might be places outside Portland that have availability. Would you be open to that? I guess we'd have to be. Can you help us look? Of course. I'll start reaching out tomorrow. Thank you, Maya. Really. You've been the only person through this whole process who hasn't made me feel like an idiot for trusting that venue. You're not an idiot. Sometimes things just don't work out the way we plan. She thanked me again and hung up. I sat in the dark of my living room, the city lights filtering through the windows, and felt nothing resembling guilt. If anything, I felt clarity. This wasn't cruelty. This was consequence. This was Brandon learning that actions have weight, that words leave marks, that you can't humiliate someone publicly and expect them to show up with solutions when your carefully constructed world falls apart. The next morning I called Rachel. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright with the energy of someone who'd already been awake for hours. Please tell me you're calling with good news about the investor meeting. I'm calling about Brandon. There was a pause. Oh no. What did he do now? It's more about what I did. I canceled his event. Rachel laughed, then stopped abruptly. Wait, you're serious? Completely. I sent the cancellation notice yesterday. He lost all his deposits. Why would you do that? You've been planning this for months. I told her about the group chat message, about the years of dismissive comments, about the way he turned my profession into a punchline while simultaneously expecting me to facilitate his dream celebration. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. So what's the plan now? Do I have your support if this gets complicated? Maya, you know I've got your back. But I have to ask, are you doing this because it's the right move, or because you're angry? Both. She laughed again, softer this time. Fair enough. Just make sure you're ready for the fallout. Family stuff gets messy. It's already messy. I'm just making the mess visible. Brandon showed up at my apartment unannounced that afternoon. I heard the knock and checked the peephole, saw him standing in the hallway looking like he hadn't slept. I considered not answering. But avoidance wasn't the point. I opened the door. We need to talk, he said, brushing past me into the apartment without waiting for an invitation. I closed the door and followed him into the living room where he stood with his arms crossed, surveying my space like he was cataloging evidence. You told me you were struggling, he said. You told the whole family you were barely getting by. I never said that. You implied it. You let us believe it. I sat down on the couch. What I let you believe and what you chose to believe are 2 different things. He shook his head. I came here for help, Maya. Real help. I need you to call in every favor you have, contact every venue you know, and find us something for next week. I already told you I'd make some calls. That's not enough. You work in this industry. You should have connections. You should be able to make something happen. I looked at him carefully. What if I told you I could make something happen? His expression shifted, hope creeping in at the edges. Can you? What if I told you I could get you the Evergreen estate back right now, today, everything exactly as you planned it? He stepped closer. Are you serious? Could you actually do that? I could. His face transformed, relief washing over him so completely that he almost looked like a different person. Oh my God, Maya. Yes. Please. Whatever you need to do, just do it. We'll pay you back, we'll cover any costs, just please make this happen. I stood up slowly. I could do that, Brandon. But first, I need you to answer a question. Anything. What made you think it was acceptable to call me entry-level in front of our entire family? He blinked. What? The group chat. 2 days ago. You wrote that I never grew past entry-level thinking. You mocked me for helping with your event. You laughed about it with Mom and Dad and Aunt Helen. That was just venting. I was frustrated about something else and it came out wrong. Came out exactly how you meant it. You've been saying things like that for years. In front of people, behind my back, in ways you thought I wouldn't notice or wouldn't care about. And now you're standing in my apartment, asking me to save your event, expecting me to call in favors for someone who fundamentally doesn't respect what I do. Maya, come on. You're being too sensitive. There it was. The phrase that had ended 1,000 conversations, the dismissal disguised as comfort, the suggestion that the problem wasn't his words but my reaction to them. I walked to the window and looked out at the street below. A food cart was setting up on the corner, the owner arranging containers and adjusting the menu board. I'd bought lunch from that cart 100 times, had watched it grow from a struggling startup to a neighborhood fixture. The owner had once told me that the hardest part wasn't the work, it was convincing people that what looks small was actually significant. Brandon, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interrupting. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The Evergreen Estate didn't cancel your event because of unforeseen complications. They canceled it because I told them to. I own that venue. I own 3 venues across Portland. I run a company worth $12 million. I have 28 employees. And the reason you got the Evergreen Estate in the first place was because I gave it to you. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Brandon's face went through a series of expressions, confusion to disbelief to something that might have been understanding. You're lying, he said finally. I pulled out my phone, opened my email and handed it to him. He scrolled through messages, contracts, financial reports, all of them with my name in the signature line. All of them stamped with the Milestone Events by Hartley logo. His hand started shaking. This doesn't make sense. You dropped out of college. You were broke. I was broke. Then I built something. And you never once asked what I was building. You just assumed I was failing because that fit the story you wanted to tell. Brandon sat down heavily on the arm of my couch, still holding my phone like it was evidence in a trial he couldn't comprehend. His face had gone pale, the kind of bloodless color that comes when shock overrides every other system in the body. He scrolled back through the emails again. Slower this time, reading dates and dollar amounts and project summaries that painted a picture he'd never imagined existed. When he finally looked up at me, his eyes were different. The confidence that usually lived there, that casual certainty that he understood the world and his place in it, had been replaced by something raw and unfamiliar. You've had this for 5 years, he said quietly. 5 years of watching me treat you like you were nobody. I didn't correct him. The statement hung in the air between us, true and terrible. He set my phone down on the coffee table with the care of someone handling something fragile, though I suspected it was his own sense of reality that felt breakable in that moment. Why didn't you tell us? Why did you let everyone think you were struggling? I moved away from the window and sat in the chair across from him, maintaining distance. Because nobody asked Brandon. Not once in 5 years did anyone in this family ask me how business was actually going. Dad asked if I had health insurance. Mom asked if I was happy. You asked if I wanted to get serious about my career. But nobody asked what I'd already built. He shook his head slowly like he was trying to physically dislodge the information, make it settle into a configuration that made more sense. But you never said anything. You let us worry about you. You let Mom and Dad think you needed help. What help did they offer? I asked. What concrete support did anyone extend? He opened his mouth, then closed it. The silence was answer enough. They'd worried, perhaps, in the abstract way people worry about things they don't actually intend to address. But worry isn't support. Concern isn't action. And the difference between the two had shaped every interaction I'd had with my family for half a decade. I could have told you at any point, I continued. I could have brought it up at Thanksgiving or Christmas or any of the dozen family dinners where you made jokes about my party planning hobby. But I wanted to see something. I wanted to see if any of you would look past your assumptions long enough to notice that I wasn't the person you decided I was. What were we supposed to notice? Brandon asked, and there was something almost pleading in his voice. You never showed us anything. I showed you exactly what everyone else saw. I showed up to events dressed professionally. I talked about my work when asked. I mentioned clients and projects and timelines. The information was always there. You just chose not to hear it because it contradicted the story you preferred. He stood up abruptly, paced to the window, turned back. This is insane. You're telling me that while I was giving you advice about getting a real job, you were running a multimillion-dollar company? Yes. And when I was suggesting you network with my hospitality contacts, you already own the premier event venues in Portland. Yes. His voice rose. Then you made a fool of me. You let me lecture you about business while you were my landlord, essentially. You let me pity you. I never asked for your pity, but you cultivated it. You played the part of the struggling sibling. I didn't play anything, Brandon. I just didn't perform success in the way you required to recognize it. I didn't post about my achievements on social media. I didn't name-drop clients at family dinners. I didn't measure my worth by how impressed other people were. And because I didn't perform, you assumed I had nothing worth performing. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the floor. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, more controlled. So the venue cancellation. That was revenge. It was consequence. There's a difference. He looked up sharply. You cost me $12,000 and humiliated me in front of my wife and my entire family because I made a stupid comment in a group chat? I canceled an event at a venue I own because the client publicly disrespected me. If you were anyone else, if you'd written that message about any other vendor you were working with, what do you think would have happened? Nothing, he admitted. Most people would just ignore it. Exactly. Most people don't have the power to respond. But I do. And I chose to use it. Brandon walked back to the couch and sat down properly this time, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. Lisa is going to lose her mind when she finds out about this. She already thinks I'm a failure for losing the venue. Wait until she knows I lost it because my sister owns it and I was too stupid to realize. This isn't about making you look stupid. Then what is it about? I leaned forward. It's about visibility. For 5 years, I've been invisible to this family in every way that matters. You saw me as a project, something that needed fixing or guidance or patience. You never saw me as someone who might have already figured things out. And that dismissal, that casual erasure of who I actually am, it compounded. Every joke, every piece of unsolicited advice, every time you referred to my career as a hobby or suggested I needed to grow up, it built up. And that group chat message was just the most recent brick on a very tall wall. He was quiet, absorbing this. Then he asked, "What do you want from me? An apology? A public confession? What would make this right?" "I don't know if anything makes it right," I said honestly. "But I needed you to understand what you've been doing. I needed the power dynamic to shift just once so you could feel what it's like to need something from someone you've spent years diminishing." That's cruel, Maya. Maybe. But it's also honest. And honestly is something this family has been avoiding for a long time. He rubbed his face with both hands, a gesture of exhaustion I recognized from our father. "When did you become so hard?" he asked. "When did surviving require me to be soft?" I shot back. "You had the luxury of family support, of assumed competence, of being celebrated for every achievement no matter how modest. I had to build everything alone while being told I was building it wrong. That doesn't make you hard. It makes you resilient. But from where you're sitting, I suppose those look the same." Brandon stood up, picked up my phone from the table and held it out to me. "I don't know what to say to you right now. I don't think I can say anything that would matter." "Then don't say anything yet," I suggested, taking the phone. "Sit with this. Think about what it means. And when you're ready to have a conversation that doesn't start with you telling me what I should have done differently, we can talk." He nodded slowly, moved toward the door, then stopped. "The event. Is there any way to salvage it?" "I could reinstate the booking," I said. "I could pretend none of this happened and let you have your perfect day. Is that what you want?" He thought about it, and I watched him wrestle with competing desires. The desire to have what he'd planned versus the desire to not accept help from someone he'd wronged. Finally, he said, "I don't know." "Then figure it out," I told him. "You have until tomorrow morning. After that, the date gets booked for someone else." He left without another word, and I sat in my apartment listening to his footsteps fade down the hallway. The rest of the evening passed in a strange suspension of tension and relief. I'd said what needed saying. I'd revealed what needed revealing. But I hadn't resolved anything, and I wasn't sure resolution was possible. Around 8, my mother called. I almost didn't answer, but avoiding her would only delay the inevitable. "Maya," she said when I picked up, her voice tight with stress. "Brandon just left here. He told us something that doesn't make any sense." "What did he tell you?" "That you own the venue. That you run some kind of event company. That you've been lying to us for years." "I haven't lied to anyone," I said carefully. "I've just allowed you to maintain assumptions I didn't bother correcting." "So it's true? You own the Evergreen estate?" "I own 3 venues, including that one." My mother made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a laugh. "How is that possible? You were sleeping on Rachel's couch 5 years ago. And then I built a business. That's generally how these things work. Don't be flippant with me, Maya. This is serious. Your brother is devastated. His event is ruined and now he's finding out his sister has been hiding some secret empire. It's not an empire. It's a company. And it's only secret because nobody asked. I asked how you were doing every time we spoke. You asked if I was happy. That's not the same as asking about my work, my revenue, my growth strategy, or any of the details you would have asked Brandon if he'd started a business. There was a pause. That's not fair. Isn't it? When Brandon started in real estate, Dad helped him study for his licensing exam. You threw him a party when he closed his first sale. You framed the article when he got featured in that local business magazine. What did you do when I told you I was leaving college to pursue event planning? You asked when I was going back. I could hear my mother breathing on the other end of the line, the kind of controlled breathing people do when they're trying not to cry or yell. We were worried about you, she said finally. You didn't have a plan. You didn't have stability. I had a plan. You just didn't like it. So you dismissed it. And when I succeeded anyway, you didn't notice because you'd already decided what my story was supposed to look like. That's not true. Then tell me one conversation we've had in the past 5 years where you asked meaningful questions about my work. Tell me one time you treated my career with the same respect you gave Brandon's. Silence. I waited, giving her time to search her memory for evidence that would prove me wrong. The silence stretched longer. Finally, she said, I don't know what you want me to say. I want you to acknowledge that you made assumptions about my life based on the fact that my path didn't look like the one you expected. I want you to recognize that support and worry are not the same thing. And I want you to understand why I made the choice I made with Brandon's event. You canceled his celebration out of spite, she said. And there was anger in her voice now. You punished him for one careless comment. It wasn't one comment, Mom. It was years of comments. It was being introduced as the sister who does parties while he was introduced as the successful real estate agent. It was being treated like a cautionary tale at family gatherings. It was listening to him give me career advice when he had no idea what my career actually looked like. That message in the group chat wasn't the problem. It was just the moment I decided to stop pretending it didn't matter. My mother was quiet again, and when she spoke, her voice had changed. She sounded tired. I don't know how to fix this, Maya. I don't know if you can, I said gently. But you could start by believing me when I tell you how I experienced this family. You could stop defending Brandon's behavior and start asking why I felt invisible enough to hide my success for 5 years. You could consider that maybe the problem isn't that I didn't tell you. Maybe the problem is that you never created space for me to be seen. She hung up without saying goodbye. I set my phone on the table and walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stood at the sink drinking it slowly. Through the window I could see the apartment building across the street, dozens of lit windows revealing fragments of other people's lives. Someone cooking dinner. Someone watching television. Someone sitting alone at a desk. All of these separate stories happening simultaneously, each one complete unto itself, each one invisible to the others unless someone bothered to look closely. Rachel called an hour later. Please tell me you're okay. She'd clearly heard from someone. I'm fine. Brandon knows. Everyone knows. I talked to your mom. She called me trying to figure out if I was part of some conspiracy to make the family look foolish. What did you tell her? I told her the truth. That you built something extraordinary and that her son is an ass who deserved what he got. Rachel paused. She didn't love hearing that. I don't imagine she did. Are you having second thoughts? About what? About any of this? About burning bridges with your family over a business decision. I didn't burn anything, I said. I just stopped building bridges by myself while everyone else stood on the other side wondering why I was taking so long. Rachel laughed softly. That's poetic and probably healthy, but it doesn't answer my question. Are you okay? Honestly, I don't know yet. I feel lighter in some ways, like I've been carrying something heavy and finally set it down. But I also feel exposed. Like I've revealed something that can't be taken back. You can't take it back, Rachel confirmed. And you probably shouldn't. But you need to prepare yourself for the reality that your family might not respond the way you hope. I'm not sure what I hope for, I admitted. I think I just wanted them to see me. Really see me. Not the version they assumed I was, but the person I've actually become. You deserve that, Rachel said firmly. Every single person deserves to be seen accurately by the people who claim to love them. Whether your family can do that is on them, not you. We talked for a few more minutes about logistics, about upcoming events at the venues, about a potential investor meeting scheduled for the following week. Normal things. Business things. The conversation was grounding, a reminder that my professional life existed independent of family drama, that I'd built something real regardless of whether my family acknowledged it. That night, I dreamed about the opening day of my first venue, Rachel and I standing in an empty event hall, the space echoing with possibility, both of us terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. In the dream, my family showed up unannounced. They walked through the space asking questions I couldn't answer fast enough, their voices overlapping, their expectations crushing. I woke up at 3 a.m. with my heart racing and couldn't fall back asleep. Instead, I sat in my living room in the dark, thinking about the choice I'd given Brandon. Reinstate the event or lose the date. It was an ultimatum, but it was also an opportunity. An opportunity for him to make a decision based on who we actually were to each other, not who we'd been pretending to be. By morning, I still hadn't heard from him. I went through my routine mechanically. Shower, coffee, emails, client calls. Rachel texted me around 10 asking if there was news. Not yet, I replied. At 11:30, my phone rang. Brandon. I answered. I've been up all night thinking, he said without preamble. And I need to ask you something before I make a decision. Ask. If I accept your offer to reinstate the event, does that mean I'm accepting your version of our relationship? Does it mean I'm admitting you're right about everything? I considered the question carefully. It means you're accepting help from someone you hurt. It means you're acknowledging that I have power you didn't know about. Whether that makes me right about everything is something you'd have to decide for yourself. But yes, there would be an implicit acknowledgement that things between us are not what you thought they were. He was quiet for a moment. Lisa wants me to take the offer. She says we can deal with the family stuff later, but right now we need to focus on the event. What do you want? I want to not need your help, he said honestly. I want to fix this myself and prove I don't require rescue from my little sister. But I can't. Every other venue in the area is booked or prohibitively expensive or completely wrong for what we planned. So I'm stuck choosing between my pride and my wife's happiness. Those are the stakes, I agreed. And I won't make the choice for you. He exhaled slowly. If I say yes, if I accept your offer, I need you to promise me something. What? Don't hold this over me forever. Don't use this as ammunition in every future disagreement. Don't make me pay for this indefinitely. I can promise I won't weaponize it, I said. But I can't promise we'll pretend it didn't happen. This moment matters, Brandon. It's evidence of something true about our relationship. We can move forward from it, but we can't erase it. All right, he said finally. All right. Please reinstate the event. I'll tell Lisa to expect a call from the venue manager today. And Brandon? What? Thank you for being honest about what this costs you. It matters. He hung up. I immediately called the venue's operations manager and instructed her to contact Brandon within the hour with news of a miraculous reopening in the schedule. The story would be that another client had moved their date, freeing up the venue for his vow renewal. Brandon would know the truth, but Lisa and everyone else could accept the cover story. It was a kindness I hadn't decided to extend until that moment, a small grace in an otherwise stark situation. The venue manager called me back 20 minutes later to confirm that Brandon had received the news and that Lisa had cried with relief. She also mentioned, with some amusement, that Brandon had sounded less enthusiastic than his wife, more subdued, like someone who just agreed to terms he wasn't entirely comfortable with. I thanked her for handling it professionally and reminded her that the full story was not for public consumption. She assured me that discretion was part of what I paid her for, and we ended the call. The family group chat went silent for 2 full days. No messages, no reactions, nothing. It was the kind of silence that follows a detonation, when everyone is still assessing damage and deciding how to respond. I didn't break it. I went about my work, met with clients, reviewed contracts, attended a ribbon cutting for a small business in Selwood that was using one of our venues for their launch party. Life continued in its normal rhythm. But underneath it all was the awareness that something fundamental had shifted. I'd stopped being the person my family thought I was and started being the person I actually was. The gap between those two versions had been bridged, but the structure that bridge created was still untested. On the 3rd day, my father called. His voice was formal when I answered, the tone he used for difficult conversations. Maya, I think we need to have a family meeting. All of us together. To discuss what's happened. When were you thinking? This weekend. Sunday afternoon. Your mother and I will host. Brandon and Lisa will be there. We'd like you to come. It wasn't really a request, though he'd phrased it politely. I agreed to come, mostly because I was curious to see what they thought a family meeting would accomplish. We set a time, and he hung up with the same formality he'd started with. No small talk. No pretense of casual connection. Just the framework of an agenda. I told Rachel about the meeting over lunch at a Thai restaurant near the office. She made a face. Family meetings are where people go to perform reconciliation without actually changing anything. You think it's pointless? I think it's a stage. Everyone will say what they think they're supposed to say, and then they'll expect you to accept those performances as genuine growth. What should I do differently? Tell the truth, Rachel said simply. Don't let them rewrite the narrative to make themselves comfortable. Don't accept apologies that are really just requests to move on without accountability. And don't minimize what you built just to make them feel better about missing it. She stabbed a piece of tofu with her fork. You spent 5 years being smaller than you are. Don't shrink now. Her words stayed with me through the rest of the week. Don't shrink now. It felt like advice for a larger life. Not just a family meeting. Like a principle I'd need to carry forward into every interaction where someone expected me to accommodate their discomfort at the expense of my truth. The day of the meeting arrived overcast and cool, typical June weather in Portland where summer took its time showing up. I drove to my parents' house in the late afternoon, arriving exactly on time. The house looked the same as it always had. A modest craftsman in the Hawthorne neighborhood with a front porch that needed new paint, and a garden my mother tended with more hope than expertise. Brandon's car was already in the driveway, parked at an angle that suggested he'd arrived in a hurry. I sat in my car for an extra minute, gathering my thoughts, reminding myself that I didn't owe anyone a performance. Then I got out and walked to the front door. My mother answered before I could knock. She looked tired, older somehow, like the past week had compressed years of aging into days. She hugged me briefly, an automatic gesture that felt more obligatory than affectionate, and stepped aside to let me in. Everyone's in the living room, she said quietly. I followed her through the familiar hallway, past family photos that documented a version of our history that suddenly felt curated and incomplete. In the living room, my father sat in his usual chair, Brandon and Lisa occupied the couch, and 2 additional chairs had been pulled in from the dining room. The arrangement felt like a tribunal. I took one of the dining room chairs, positioning myself slightly apart from the main seating area. My father cleared his throat. Thank you for coming, Maya. I know this week has been difficult for everyone. I didn't respond. He continued. We wanted to have this conversation as a family, because some things have come to light that we need to address. Brandon, do you want to start? Brandon looked at me, then at his hands. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about what I said in the group chat and about how I've talked about Maya over the years. And I realize I owe you an apology. He paused and I waited. I'm sorry for making jokes about your career. I'm sorry for not taking you seriously. And I'm sorry for the comment about entry-level thinking. That was wrong. The apology hung in the air, sincere enough on the surface but lacking the depth of real reckoning. Thank you, I said. Can I ask you something? He nodded. Do you understand why those comments were harmful, or are you apologizing because you got caught? He flinched slightly. I understand they were harmful. Explain it to me then. Help me understand what you've come to realize. Brandon shifted uncomfortably. You were building something real and I treated it like it was nothing. I made assumptions about your success based on the fact that you didn't perform it the way I would have. And I let those assumptions justify a pattern of disrespect. That's better, I said. That's closer to actual understanding. He looked relieved, but I wasn't finished. Now tell me why you made those assumptions in the first place. What about me, about my choices, about my path made you think it was acceptable to position yourself as superior? The room went very quiet. Brandon glanced at our father, then back at me. I don't know. I think I just needed to believe I was the successful one, that I'd figured things out and you hadn't. Why did you need that? Because you were always the one they worried about. Even when I was doing everything right, closing deals, making money, building a reputation, they still talked about you like you were this fragile thing that might break. And it made me angry. So I created a narrative where I was thriving and you were struggling because at least then the attention you got made sense. The honesty surprised me. It was more than I'd expected, more vulnerable than Brandon usually allowed himself to be. I looked at my mother. Is that true? Were you talking about me like I was fragile? She folded her hands in her lap. We were concerned. You'd left school without a degree. You were working jobs that didn't seem stable. We didn't want you to struggle. But I wasn't struggling. Not in the way you imagined. You were surviving, she corrected gently. That's not the same as thriving. I turned to my father. What about you? Did you think I was just surviving? He adjusted his glasses, a habit from his years teaching high school that he'd never lost. I thought you were finding your way. I didn't realize you'd already found it. Why didn't you ask? He didn't have an answer for that, or if he did, he wasn't ready to say it out loud. I looked around the room at all of them. Here's what I need you to understand. I didn't hide my success to punish you or to prove a point. I just stopped offering information that nobody seemed interested in receiving. Every time I started to talk about my work, the conversation shifted. Every time I mentioned a project or a client or a milestone, someone changed the subject or offered advice I didn't ask for. After a while, I realized I was trying to be seen by people who had already decided what they were looking at. So I stopped trying. I built my company quietly, and I let you believe whatever made you comfortable. That's on me. But the fact that you never question your assumptions, that you never looked closely enough to notice the gaps between what you believed and what was real, that's on you. Lisa spoke for the first time. I don't think they meant to hurt you. I know they didn't, I said. That's almost worse. Intentional cruelty you can confront and refuse. Casual dismissal just becomes the air you breathe. You don't even realize it's suffocating you until you step outside and remember what it feels like to be fully seen. My mother's eyes were wet. I don't want you to feel like we don't see you. Then start looking, I said simply. Start asking questions that go deeper than surface politeness. Start treating my work with the same respect you give Brandon's. Start recognizing that different paths can be equally valid. And most importantly, start believing me when I tell you who I am instead of insisting I must be who you expected. Can you do that? She nodded, wiping her eyes. We can try. Trying is a starting place, I acknowledged. But I need you to understand that trust doesn't reset just because you apologize. You're going to have to prove over time that things are different. I'm willing to give you that time, but I'm not willing to pretend the past 5 years didn't happen. My father leaned forward. What do you need from us, Maya? What would make this right? I thought about the question, about all the ways I could answer it. Finally, I said, I need you to tell the truth at the vow renewal. What do you mean? Brandon asked, alarm in his voice. I mean, when people ask how you got such an incredible venue on short notice, tell them the truth. Tell them your sister owns it. Tell them she gave it to you as a gift after you'd lost it. Tell them the whole story. You can't be serious, Brandon said. That would humiliate me in front of everyone. Why is telling the truth humiliating? I asked. Because it makes me look like I needed rescue from my little sister, he shot back. You did need rescue. That's not a character flaw, Brandon. That's just reality. But hiding it, pretending it didn't happen, acting like you fixed everything yourself, that's where the problem lives. You want to move forward? Start by being honest about where we actually are. Lisa put her hand on Brandon's arm. Maybe she's right. Maybe we should just tell people. He looked at her incredulously. You want our anniversary celebration to be about how my sister saved me? I want it to be honest, Lisa said quietly. I'm tired of pretending things are perfect when they're complicated. I'm tired of performing success when what I really want is connection. If telling the truth about Maya's help means some people judge us, then let them judge us. At least it's real. Brandon stared at his wife like he was seeing her for the first time, and something in his expression shifted. All right, he said finally. All right. We'll tell people the truth. You'll tell them the whole truth? I pressed. Not a sanitized version where you accidentally discovered I own the venue, but the actual story of what happened. He took a breath. Yes, the whole truth. The meeting continued for another hour, circling through various aspects of our family dynamics, old resentments surfacing and being examined with varying degrees of success. My mother talked about how she'd always wanted me to have stability, how her own mother had struggled financially, and she'd been terrified of seeing me repeat that pattern. My father admitted he didn't know how to relate to a career path he didn't understand, that his entire framework for success was built around traditional employment and measurable credentials. Brandon talked more about the jealousy he'd felt, the way he'd needed to be the golden child and had unconsciously worked to keep me in the position of the struggling one. None of it was resolved neatly. There was no moment of perfect catharsis where everyone suddenly understood everything and all wounds healed. But there was honesty, more of it than I'd experienced in years, and that felt like progress. As I was leaving, my mother walked me to the door. "I'm proud of you," she said. "I know I should have said it sooner. I know I should have asked more questions and made more space for you to share your life. But I am proud. And I'm sorry it took something dramatic to make me see what was right in front of me." I hugged her. And this time it felt real. "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you know." She held on to me for an extra moment. "The vow renewal is in 3 days. Are you coming?" "I am." "Will it be strange?" "Probably. But I think strange might be better than pretending." She smiled, and I saw relief in her face. I got in my car and drove home through the quiet streets of early evening, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The next 2 days passed in a blur of final preparations for Brandon's event. The team at the Evergreen Estate worked their usual magic, transforming the space into something that looked effortless but required hundreds of hours of coordinated effort. I stayed mostly behind the scenes, checking details, approving arrangements, making sure everything aligned with the vision Brandon and Lisa had originally planned. On the morning of the event, I arrived early to do a final walkthrough. The space was perfect. Flowers cascaded from pedestals positioned throughout the garden. Tables were set with linens that caught the light like water. The arch where Brandon and Lisa would renew their vows was wrapped in white roses and trailing greenery. It looked like something from a magazine, and I felt a quiet pride in knowing my team had built this. Brandon found me in the garden around noon. He was already dressed in his suit, looking nervous and younger than his years. "Thank you for this," he said. "For all of it." "You're welcome." He hesitated, then asked, "Are you still expecting me to tell everyone the truth about the venue?" "Only if you meant it when you agreed." "I did." He nodded. "I'm terrified, but I did mean it." "The fear is healthy," I said. "It means you're about to do something that matters." He smiled weakly. "Lisa keeps telling me the same thing. She's smart." He laughed. "Yeah, she is." We stood together in silence for a moment, two siblings who'd spent years performing a relationship instead of having one. Then Brandon said, "I know this doesn't fix everything, but I want you to know I'm going to try. To see you. To really see you. That's all I'm asking for," I told him. The ceremony began at 3 in the afternoon. 150 people filled the garden, family and friends dressed in their finest, everyone smiling and holding champagne glasses and existing in that particular kind of joy that comes from witnessing two people recommit to loving each other. I sat in the back, watching Brandon and Lisa stand under the arch my team had built, listening to them exchange vows they'd written themselves. When it came time for Brandon to speak, he talked about the past 15 years, about the ways they'd grown together, about the challenges they'd overcome. And then he said something I hadn't expected. "I want to take a moment to acknowledge someone who made this day possible in ways most of you don't know about. A few weeks ago, we lost this venue due to circumstances that felt catastrophic. We'd lost our deposits, our plans were falling apart, and I didn't know how to fix it. But my sister Maya, who I've spent years underestimating and undervaluing, gave us a gift I didn't deserve. She owns this venue. She owns the company that made this entire day possible. And she gave this back to us even after I'd made it clear through my words and actions that I didn't respect her or her work. I was wrong. I was wrong about her capabilities, about her success, and about her generosity. So before we continue, I want to say publicly, in front of everyone we love, thank you, Maya. Thank you for building something extraordinary. Thank you for seeing past my arrogance. And thank you for teaching me that success doesn't always look the way we expect it to." The garden fell silent. People turned in their seats to look at me. I felt my face flush, uncomfortable with the attention but also moved by the gesture. Lisa was crying. My mother was crying. Even my father looked emotional in the way men of his generation expressed emotion, which is to say he looked slightly uncomfortable and deeply feeling simultaneously. I nodded at Brandon, a small acknowledgement that his words had landed, that they mattered. He smiled, and we finished the ceremony. The reception was everything a celebration should be. Music and dancing and food that tasted better than it had any right to. People approached me throughout the evening, some of them family members I barely knew, others friends of Brandon's who'd heard the speech and wanted to express their amazement. I answered questions about my company, about how I'd built it, about what it was like to work in event planning. I told them abbreviated versions of the truth, enough to satisfy curiosity without revealing all the complicated emotions underneath. Mostly I watched. I watched Brandon dance with his daughter Sophie, spinning her around while she laughed. I watched Lisa talking with my mother, the two of them looking more relaxed than I'd seen them in weeks. I watched my father attempting to dance, his movements stiff but enthusiastic, and felt affection for him despite everything. Around 9 in the evening, as the party was beginning to wind down, Rachel found me standing near the edge of the garden. "You did it," she said. "You actually pulled this off." What did I pull off? The whole thing. The reveal, the confrontation, the reconciliation. You navigated a minefield and somehow everyone's still standing. I leaned against the railing that separated the garden from the forest beyond. I'm not sure everyone's standing. I think some people are just really good at staying upright when they're actually collapsing inside. Deep, Rachel said with a smile. But probably true. She looked out at the party, at the people laughing and celebrating. "Do you think things will actually change with your family?" "I think they'll try," I said. Whether trying translates to lasting change is a different question. But I'm more interested in whether I change. Whether I stay committed to being fully visible, even when it's uncomfortable. That's the part one can control. We stood together watching the celebration. Two friends who'd built something meaningful out of nothing, who'd taken a risk when everyone else saw only foolishness. Eventually Rachel said, "I should get back to the office. There's a contract I need to review before Monday." "You're leaving your own event?" "It's not my event," I reminded her. "It's Brandon's. And besides, the work doesn't stop just because we're having feelings." She laughed and hugged me. "Call me later. Let me know how the rest of the night goes." I promised I would, and she disappeared into the building. I stayed outside for a few more minutes, breathing in the cool evening air, listening to the music drift across the garden. Then I went back inside to rejoin the celebration. The evening ended with sparklers and champagne toasts and Brandon lifting Lisa off her feet in a gesture of joy that looked genuine and earned. People began filtering out around 10:30, thanking me as they passed, some of them still stunned by the revelation that I'd been the invisible hand behind their perfect evening. By 11, only family remained. We sat together in the now empty reception hall, exhausted and full, talking about nothing important and everything important simultaneously. My mother told stories about Brandon and me as children, stories I'd heard before but that landed differently now. My father asked thoughtful questions about my business, real questions that suggested actual interest rather than polite inquiry. Brandon and Lisa held hands and looked at each other like people who just survived something difficult and come out closer for it. Around midnight, as we were preparing to leave, my father pulled me aside. "I've been thinking about something you said at the family meeting, about how we never questioned our assumptions about you." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I think I do that with a lot of people. I decide who they are based on limited information, and then I stop looking for evidence that contradicts my conclusion. That's a hard thing to admit." "It is. But I'm realizing it's necessary. You deserved better from me, Maya. You deserved curiosity and attention and belief. I'm sorry I didn't give you those things." I hugged him and he held on tight. "We have time," I said. "We can do better going forward." "I'd like that," he replied. "I really like that." I drove home through empty streets, the city quiet in the way it only gets late at night when most people are asleep, and the ones who aren't feel like they're the only ones awake in the world. My apartment welcomed me with familiar silence. I changed into comfortable clothes, made tea I didn't drink, and sat on my couch thinking about everything that had happened over the past 2 weeks. The confrontation, the revelation, the apologies, the celebration. It all felt simultaneously monumental and ordinary, like I'd climbed a mountain only to discover the view from the top looked remarkably similar to the view from the bottom, just from a different angle. My phone buzzed with a text from Brandon. "Thank you again for tonight. For everything. I know I keep saying it, but I need you to know I mean it." I typed back, "You're welcome. And I'm glad we're starting to be honest with each other." His response came quickly. Me too. It's terrifying but also kind of liberating. Like I don't have to pretend anymore. That's exactly what it is, I wrote. And it gets easier the more you practice it. He sent a heart emoji, something he'd never done before, and I smiled. Small gestures. Small steps towards something different. I thought about Rachel's question from earlier. Do you think things will actually change? The truth was I didn't know. People rarely transformed completely. They shifted, adjusted, made incremental improvements that sometimes accumulated into something significant, and sometimes just rearranged the furniture of their flaws. But the possibility of change, the willingness to try, that felt like enough for now. I'd spent 5 years being invisible by choice, protecting myself from dismissal by never fully offering myself to be seen. That protection had cost me something too. The chance for genuine connection, for being known in my fullness, for having my achievements celebrated by people who loved me. Now that protection was gone. I was visible, vulnerable, open to both the joy and the pain of being truly seen. It was terrifying. It was also, as Brandon had said, liberating. The city lights blinked through my window, each one representing someone else's story, someone else's struggle toward being known. I thought about all the people working invisibly, building things quietly, achieving success without fanfare or recognition. I thought about how much effort it takes to be seen when the world has decided you're not worth looking at. And I thought about how sweet it feels when someone finally adjusts their vision and says, I see you now. I really see you. That was what I'd wanted from my family. Not praise, not celebration. Just the simple acknowledgement that I existed in my fullness. That my path was valid even if it looked different from what they'd expected. Tonight I'd gotten pieces of that. Not everything. Not perfect understanding. But enough to believe that more was possible. I finished my tea and went to bed, tired in the way that comes from emotional exertion rather than physical work. As I was falling asleep, I thought about the quote that had been running through my mind all week. Applause sounds different when it only comes after the trophy is visible. It was true. But I'd learned something else too. Sometimes you have to show people the trophy before they understand the game you were playing. Sometimes visibility requires disruption. And sometimes the cost of being fully known is worth whatever comfort you lose along the way. I closed my eyes and let sleep come, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to be seen or dismissed, new choices about how much of myself to offer the world. But tonight I'd rest. Tonight, I'd let the weight of 5 years of hiding finally lift. Tonight I'd allow myself to be proud of what I'd built, regardless of who noticed or when. That felt like enough. That felt like victory. The weeks following the vow renewal unfolded in a rhythm that felt both familiar and entirely new. My family didn't transform overnight into the supportive circle I'd once imagined wanting. But something had shifted in the foundation, a recalibration of how we understood each other and what we expected from our interactions. My mother started calling me on weekday afternoons, not to check if I was okay but to ask about specific projects I was working on. She'd remember details from previous conversations and follow up with thoughtful questions that revealed she was actually listening. My father sent me articles about event industry trends, sometimes with brief notes saying he thought of me when he read them. These were small gestures, easily dismissed as inconsequential, but to me they represented a fundamental change in attention. They were looking at me differently now, not as a problem to worry about but as a person engaged in meaningful work. Brandon took longer to adjust. In the immediate aftermath of the vow renewal, he was effusive with gratitude, texting me photos from the event, thanking me repeatedly for giving him and Lisa their perfect day. But as time passed and the crisis receded into memory, I could feel him struggling with the new dynamic between us. He was no longer the undisputed successful sibling, and I was no longer the struggling one who needed guidance. We existed now in a more complicated space where neither of us held clear hierarchical advantage, and he didn't seem to know how to navigate that terrain. Our conversations became careful, almost formal, as if we were both afraid of saying something that would trigger another confrontation. I understood the impulse. We were building something new and neither of us wanted to break it before it had a chance to solidify. Lisa, surprisingly, became someone I talked to more frequently. She reached out a few weeks after the vow renewal to ask if we could have coffee, just the two of us. We met at a cafe in the Alberta Arts District, a neighborhood neither of us had particular attachment to, neutral ground. She ordered a latte and I got tea, and we sat by the window watching people pass on the sidewalk. "Thank you for meeting me," she said. "I wasn't sure you'd want to." "Why wouldn't I?" "Because I stood by while Brandon made jokes about you for years. I laughed at some of them. I didn't push back when he dismissed your work. I was complicit, and I've been thinking about that a lot since the vow renewal." Her honesty disarmed me. "I appreciate you saying that. Most people don't acknowledge the role of the bystander." She stirred her coffee absently. "I think I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere in sibling dynamics. But that was just an excuse. The truth is I benefited from Brandon feeling superior to you. It made him less threatened by my success, less competitive about my salary being higher than his. As long as he could point to you and feel like the accomplished sibling, he didn't have to wrestle with his insecurities about our marriage dynamics." "That's remarkably self-aware," I said. She shrugged. "Therapy helps. I've been going for about a year now, working through some family of origin stuff. And one of the things I've realized is how often we participate in other people's dysfunction because it serves our needs, even if we don't consciously recognize those needs exist. I've been doing that with Brandon and you. I let him diminish you because it stabilized something in our relationship. And I'm sorry for that. Apologies that come with understanding are rare," I told her. "Thank you for doing the work to get here." We talked for another hour, ranging across topics that had nothing to do with Brandon or family drama. She told me about her career in marketing, about a promotion she was pursuing, about her concerns that having children would derail her professional momentum. I told her about the challenges of scaling a business, about the tension between growth and maintaining quality, about my own ambivalence toward traditional milestones like marriage and parenthood. By the end of the conversation, I realized I genuinely liked her, not just as my brother's wife but as a person I'd choose to spend time with independent of family connection. We made plans to have coffee again the following month, and this time it felt like a real friendship forming rather than an obligation being fulfilled. Rachel noticed the changes in my family dynamics and offered wry commentary throughout. "So let me get this straight," she said one afternoon while we reviewed quarterly financials in my office. "Your family spent 5 years ignoring your success. You publicly revealed said success in the most dramatic fashion possible. And now they're acting like attentive relatives who've supported you all along?" "It's not quite that simple," I protested. "It's exactly that simple," she countered. "They're rewriting the narrative to make themselves comfortable. The question is whether you're going to let them." "I don't think it's about letting them," I said slowly. "I think it's about deciding what I need going forward. If they're making genuine effort to see me differently, does it matter that it took a crisis to get here?" Rachel considered this. "I suppose it depends on whether the change is sustainable or performative. Time will tell," I agreed. "But in the meantime, I'm choosing to accept the effort at face value and see what develops." The business continued growing at a pace that was both exhilarating and occasionally overwhelming. We booked the Evergreen Estate solid for the next 2 years, with a waiting list that stretched beyond that. Our other 2 venues maintained similar occupancy rates, and we started receiving inquiries about expansion into other cities. Seattle was the obvious next target, a market that had strong demand for luxury event spaces and enough geographic proximity to Portland that we could maintain quality control without establishing an entirely separate operation. Rachel and I spent hours debating the timing, the capital requirements, the operational challenges. She was more bullish than I was about rapid expansion, eager to capitalize on momentum while we had it. I was more cautious, concerned about stretching ourselves too thin and compromising the reputation we built on executing flawless events. Eventually we compromised, agreeing to begin preliminary location scouting in Seattle, while maintaining our focus on optimizing Portland operations. The investor interest that had been building for months finally crystallized into a concrete offer. A private equity firm with a portfolio of hospitality companies approached us about a significant capital injection in exchange for minority ownership. The terms were generous, the valuation was fair, and the opportunity would give us resources to expand faster than we could through organic growth alone. Rachel was excited about the possibilities. I was terrified of losing control, of having outside voices influence decisions about company culture and service standards. We spent a week in intensive discussions with the investors, asking questions about their involvement expectations, their timeline for returns, their philosophy about business operations. They said all the right things about respecting founder vision and supporting growth without interfering in day-to-day management. But I'd heard enough business stories to know that promises made during courtship don't always survive the reality of partnership. I called my father, surprising both of us with the gesture. He'd spent his career as a high school teacher, far removed from the world of private equity and business deals, but he had a clarity of thinking I'd always respected, even when we'd struggled to connect. I need advice, I told him. I'm considering taking on outside investors and I'm scared I'll lose something essential if I do. He listened while I explained the opportunity, the trade-offs, the competing visions between Rachel's enthusiasm and my caution. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What's the thing you're most afraid of losing?" "Creative control," I said immediately. "The ability to make decisions based on what's right for clients, rather than what maximizes profit. Can you build protections for that into the agreement?" "I can try, but I don't know if they'll hold when pressure comes." "Pressure always comes eventually." "Then maybe the question isn't whether to take the investment," he said. "Maybe it's whether you're willing to fight for your values when that pressure arrives. Because if you're not, no contract language will save you. But if you are, the investment might give you resources to fight more effectively." His words clarified something I'd been circling around. I wasn't afraid of growth or capital or expansion. I was afraid of becoming someone who prioritized financial return over human experience, who made decisions based on spreadsheets rather than the quality of moments we created for clients. But that fear wasn't about the investors. It was about me and what I'd allow myself to become under pressure. If I could stay committed to my values regardless of stakeholder expectations, the investment was just a tool. If I couldn't, the money would only accelerate my compromise. Rachel and I ultimately decided to accept the investment with carefully negotiated terms that protected founder decision-making authority on key operational matters. The contract was complex, drafted over several weeks with lawyers who specialized in founder-friendly deal structures. When we finally signed, I felt a mixture of excitement and unease. We just bet on ourselves in a bigger way than ever before, and the stakes of failure had increased proportionally. Brandon called me the day the investment was announced in the Portland Business Journal. "I saw the article," he said, his voice containing something I couldn't quite identify. "Congratulations. That's a massive deal." "Thank you. How do you feel about it?" "Terrified and hopeful in equal measure." He laughed. "That sounds about right for anything worth doing." We talked for a few minutes about the details of the deal, and I realized this was the first time Brandon had asked substantive questions about my business without any undertone of skepticism or condescension. He was engaging with genuine curiosity, treating me as a peer rather than a project. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. Near the end of the conversation, he said, "I've been thinking about something. About how I've approached my own career, my own definition of success. And I'm realizing I've been chasing external validation more than internal satisfaction. Watching you build something that matters to you, that's aligned with your values, it's making me question whether I've been measuring the right things." "That's a hard question to sit with," I said. "Yeah, but I think it's a necessary one." We ended the call with plans to have dinner the following week, just the two of us, something we hadn't done in years. I hung up feeling hopeful that maybe we were finally building a relationship based on who we actually were rather than the roles we'd been assigned. Summer turned to fall, and the investment capital allowed us to begin serious work on the Seattle expansion. We identified a property in Queen Anne, a historic mansion that had been operating as an unsuccessful restaurant and needed significant renovation to transform into an event venue. The bones were good, the location was ideal, and the price was just within our budget if we were willing to take on substantial construction risk. Rachel and I made probably a dozen trips to Seattle over 2 months, meeting with contractors, architects, city planning officials, anyone whose approval or expertise we needed to make the project viable. The process was exhausting and exhilarating, forcing us to make hundreds of decisions about design, functionality, budget allocation. Every choice felt weighted with consequence. Were we maintaining the standards that had made us successful in Portland, or were we compromising in ways that would undermine our reputation? My mother surprised me by asking if she could visit the Seattle property during one of our trips. "I'm curious to see what you're building," she said, "and I'd like to spend some time with you outside of family obligations." We drove up together on a gray October morning, rain threatening but never quite materializing. She asked questions during the drive about how Rachel and I had met, about the early days of the business, about decisions and challenges and moments that defined our growth. I found myself telling her stories I'd never shared before. Not because she'd never asked, but because I'd assumed she wouldn't understand or care. Her questions suggested otherwise. She was genuinely interested, leaning into details, laughing at the absurd situations we'd navigated, asking follow-up questions that indicated she was tracking the emotional journey as much as the business mechanics. When we arrived at the Seattle property, I walked her through the space, describing our vision for each room, explaining how we plan to balance historic preservation with modern functionality. She listened carefully, occasionally touching architectural details with an appreciative hand. At one point, standing in what would become the main event hall, she said, "I'm sorry I didn't see this sooner. What you've built, what you're building. I was so focused on wanting you to be safe that I couldn't recognize you were already creating something extraordinary. I don't need you to apologize anymore," I told her. "I just need you to keep showing up. Keep asking questions. Keep seeing me as I actually am rather than who you worried I might become." "I can do that," she said. "I want to do that." We spent the rest of the afternoon walking through the property, and I felt something that had been tense between us for years finally begin to relax. The holidays arrived with their usual mixture of obligation and anticipation. Thanksgiving at my parents' house felt different this year, the atmosphere lighter somehow, less burdened by unspoken resentments. Brandon and I didn't perform our old roles of successful sibling and struggling sibling. We just existed as two adults with complicated careers and evolving perspectives on what mattered. Lisa and I had become genuinely close, texting regularly about everything from work frustrations to book recommendations. She'd become someone I trusted, someone whose judgment I valued independent of her connection to my brother. Aunt Helen asked me detailed questions about the Seattle expansion, having apparently followed our progress through social media and news coverage. Even cousin Jessica, who'd always seemed only tangentially aware of anything happening outside her immediate sphere, expressed admiration for what Rachel and I had accomplished. My father pulled me aside after dinner while everyone else was watching football in the living room. "I've been thinking about what you said months ago, about how we never questioned our assumptions about you. And I realized I've been doing that in other areas of my life too, making judgments based on surface information, and then never revising those judgments even when evidence contradicts them. It's made me rigid in ways I don't like." "That's hard to recognize about yourself," I said. "It is. But I'm grateful for the recognition. You taught me something important, Maya. You taught me that people are always more complex than the stories we tell about them. And the stories we tell say more about us than they do about the people we're describing." We stood together in comfortable silence for a moment, two people who'd struggled to understand each other finally finding common ground. Then we rejoined the family in the living room, and I settled into the chaos of football commentary and dessert negotiations with a sense of belonging I hadn't felt in years. The Seattle venue opened in March, 6 months after we'd closed on the property and 4 months of intensive renovation work. The launch event was invitation only, a showcase for wedding planners, corporate event coordinators, and industry press. We transformed the historic mansion into something that honored its past while feeling thoroughly contemporary. All clean lines and natural light, and carefully curated details. Rachel gave a speech about our vision for expansion, about maintaining the standards that had defined us in Portland, while adapting to Seattle's distinct market. I stood beside her feeling proud of what we'd built and terrified of everything that could still go wrong. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive. We booked our first 3 events that night, and within a week we had enough deposits to cover our first year's operating costs. Brandon and Lisa came to the opening, driving up from Portland for the evening. Brandon walked through the space with obvious appreciation, stopping to examine details, asking questions about design choices and construction challenges. At one point he said, I've been in real estate for 15 years and I've never created anything this beautiful. I've facilitated transactions, helped people buy and sell properties, made good money. But I haven't built anything. Not like this." "You've built a career," I said. "That counts." "Maybe. But it's made me think about what I want the second half of my professional life to look like. Whether there's something more meaningful I could be doing. That's a good question to be asking." Lisa joined us, and the 3 of us stood together looking out the windows at the Seattle skyline. She slipped her hand into Brandon's and said, "We've been talking about what's next for us, professionally and personally. And we've decided we want to be more intentional about building things that matter rather than just accumulating achievements that look impressive." "That's ambitious," I said. "It is," Brandon agreed. "But watching you do it has made it seem possible. We don't know what it looks like yet. But we're asking different questions now, and that feels like progress." Spring brought sustained growth and the kind of operational challenges that come with success. We were fully booked across all 4 venues, turning away potential clients, building waiting lists that stretched years into the future. The team had grown to 45 people, and managing that many employees required systems and structures we'd never needed when we were smaller. Rachel thrived in the complexity, creating training programs and operational protocols that maintained quality while allowing for scale. I struggled more with the distance between me and the actual events. When we were smaller, I could be present for most celebrations, could walk spaces with clients, could ensure every detail aligned with our standards. Now I was reviewing reports and approving budgets and making strategic decisions that felt increasingly removed from the human moments that had drawn me to this work in the first place. I shared this tension with my father during one of our now regular phone calls. "It sounds like you're grieving something," he said. "What am I grieving?" "The version of your business where you could be connected to everything. That's a natural loss that comes with growth. The question is whether what you're gaining is worth what you're losing." "I don't know yet." "Then maybe you need to spend some time at the events again. Remember why you started this. Reconnect with the moments that matter." He was right. I started blocking time to be present at venues during actual celebrations, not as the CEO reviewing operations, but as someone there to witness the moments we'd created space for. I watched couples exchange vows, families celebrate milestones, colleagues honor achievements. I remembered that the spreadsheets and strategic plans were all in service of these human experiences, these moments when people felt seen and celebrated, and held by community. The work mattered not because we were profitable, but because we created beauty and meaning for people navigating the significant transitions of their lives. Reconnecting with that purpose stabilized something that had been wobbling inside me. Summer arrived with record temperatures and a full calendar of events. One Saturday evening, I was at the Evergreen Estate for a wedding when I saw a familiar face in the crowd. Sophie, Brandon's daughter, now 9 years old and growing into her own distinct personality. She was wearing a navy dress and standing near the dessert table with the focused concentration of someone plotting optimal cake acquisition strategy. I walked over and stood beside her. "That's a lot of options to choose from." She looked up at me and grinned. "Aunt Maya, I didn't know you'd be here. I work here, remember? This is my venue." She looked around with new appreciation. "This is yours. Like you own it?" "I own it." Her eyes went wide. "That's so cool. Do you get to eat the cake whenever you want?" "I could, but that would be unprofessional." She considered this seriously. "That makes sense. But it must be hard being around cake all the time and not eating it." "It builds character," I told her, and she laughed. We stood together watching the celebration unfold, and she asked me questions about how weddings worked, about why people made such elaborate plans for one day, about whether I ever got tired of seeing people get married. I answered honestly, telling her about the responsibility of holding space for people's most significant moments, about how repetition didn't diminish meaning if you stayed present to what made each celebration unique. Brandon found us eventually, looking slightly harried. "Sophie, your mom is looking for you. Time to go. Can I talk to Aunt Maya for a few more minutes?" Sophie asked. He glanced at me and I nodded. "Sure," he said. "But just a few minutes." He wandered off to find Lisa, and Sophie turned back to me. "Aunt Maya, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you and Dad used to not get along?" I hesitated, trying to find a truthful answer that was appropriate for a 9-year-old. We had different ideas about success, and we didn't communicate well about those differences. So we hurt each other without meaning to. "But you're friends now?" "We're working on it." She nodded sagely. "That's good. I like it when you come to family stuff. You ask me real questions instead of just saying I've gotten so big." "I'll remember to keep asking you real questions," I promised. She hugged me quickly and ran off to find her parents, and I stood there feeling the weight of being seen by someone who had no agenda, who simply appreciated being treated as a full human, rather than a diminished version awaiting growth. The year continued its forward momentum. carrying us all into futures we couldn't have predicted 12 months earlier. My family had transformed from people who shared DNA but little genuine understanding into something more complex and authentic. We still had difficulties, still navigated tensions and misunderstandings, but we did so with more honesty and less performance. Brandon and I developed a real friendship, one based on mutual respect rather than hierarchical positioning. My parents showed up for me in ways they hadn't before, not perfectly but sincerely, and I learned to accept imperfect effort as valuable rather than demanding flawless transformation. Lisa became someone I considered a true friend, someone I'd choose regardless of family obligation. Even extended family members shifted their engagement, asking better questions, showing genuine interest, treating my work as legitimate rather than quaint. The business continued exceeding projections, and Rachel and I began preliminary conversations about additional expansion, possibly into San Francisco or Los Angeles. The investor relationship had proven productive, providing capital and strategic guidance without the interference I'd feared. Our team was strong, our reputation was solid, and our calendar was full years in advance. I'd built something that mattered, something that would outlast me, something that created beauty and meaning in the world, that felt like success in the truest sense. Not because others recognized it, though that validation was gratifying, but because it aligned with my values and allowed me to contribute something worthwhile to the world. I'd stopped measuring myself against Brandon's achievements or my parents' expectations. I'd stopped needing anyone's permission to claim my own success. I'd learned to be visible without apology, to take up space without shrinking, to build without waiting for approval. Those lessons extended beyond business into every area of my life, shaping how I showed up in relationships, how I advocated for myself, how I moved through the world. On a quiet Tuesday evening in late autumn, almost 18 months after the vow renewal that had changed everything, I sat in my apartment looking out at the city lights and thinking about the journey from invisible to seen. It hadn't been linear or simple. There had been pain and confrontation and difficult conversations that left everyone uncomfortable. But there had also been growth and understanding and the slow building of something more authentic than what had existed before. My phone buzzed with a text from Brandon. Just wanted to say I'm proud of you. Not for the business stuff, though that's impressive. For being brave enough to demand we see you. That changed all of us for the better. I read the message twice, feeling the weight of recognition from someone who'd spent years looking past me. Then I typed back a simple response. Thank you. That means more than you know. I set my phone down and returned my attention to the window, to the city spread out below, to all the invisible people building their own versions of success in ways the world might never notice or celebrate. I thought about how visibility isn't about being seen by everyone. It's about being seen accurately by the people who matter. And how sometimes you have to disrupt everything, risk everything, reveal everything before that accuracy becomes possible. The journey had been worth it. The destination was still unfolding. And for the first time in years, I felt completely present for both. 2 years after the vow renewal, I stood in the conference room of our new corporate office in downtown Portland, looking at architectural renderings for our 6th venue. The space we'd started in Rachel's studio apartment had evolved into something neither of us could have imagined during those early desperate years. We now employed 73 people across 4 cities, and our annual revenue had crossed $28 million. The numbers were impressive, but what mattered more was that we'd maintained the integrity that had defined us from the beginning. Every event still felt personal, every client still received the attention they deserved, and our reputation remained built on excellence rather than volume. Rachel walked into the conference room carrying 2 coffees and wearing the expression she always had when she was about to propose something ambitious. I already know I'm going to say yes to whatever you're about to suggest, I told her. You don't even know what it is yet. I know that look. You're planning something that will stretch us in uncomfortable ways and ultimately make us better. She laughed and set the coffees on the table. You've known me too long. What is it this time? I want to start a foundation, a nonprofit arm that provides event planning services for families who can't afford traditional celebrations. Weddings for people with terminal illnesses, anniversary parties for couples in hospice care, celebrations for families experiencing homelessness who found stable housing. All the moments that matter but that people can't access because they lack resources. I sat down processing the proposal. That's beautiful and logistically complicated. Exactly why I knew you'd say yes. We have the infrastructure now, the team capacity, the vendor relationships. We could dedicate maybe 10% of our resources to this without impacting our commercial work. And it would give everyone on our team a chance to remember why this work matters beyond profit. I thought about the idea, about the complexity it would add to operations that were already demanding, about the emotional weight of working with families in crisis situations. I also thought about the version of myself who'd started this business, who'd been driven not just by entrepreneurial ambition, but by a genuine desire to create beauty and meaning for people navigating life's most significant moments. That version of me would have loved this proposal. The version sitting in this conference room, worried about operational efficiency and budget allocations, needed to remember her. Let's do it, I said. But we do it right. We hire someone specifically to run the foundation, someone with nonprofit experience who understands both the mission and the operational realities. We create clear boundaries about capacity so we don't burn out our team. And we build evaluation metrics that focus on impact rather than volume. Rachel grinned. I already have someone in mind for the director position. Of course you do. We spent the next hour mapping out the framework for what would become the Milestone Foundation, a 501c3 organization dedicated to providing celebration planning services for underserved communities. The work was energizing in a way that routine business operations hadn't been in months. We were building something that would matter beyond our own success, that would extend the reach of what we did to people who needed it most. By the time we finished the initial planning session, I felt reconnected to the purpose that had driven me through those early exhausting years. Brandon called that evening, while I was cooking dinner in my apartment. I heard about the foundation, he said. Lisa saw Rachel's post about it on social media. That's an incredible idea. Thanks. We're excited about the possibilities. He was quiet for a moment. Can I tell you something? I've been thinking a lot about legacy lately, about what I want to leave behind beyond closed deals and commission checks. And I'm realizing I want to do something that matters in a deeper way. Something like what you're building. I said. You have skills and resources. It's just a matter of directing them differently. I know. I've actually started volunteering with a housing nonprofit, helping people understand the home buying process, advocating for first-time buyers who don't have family wealth to rely on. It's early, but it feels more meaningful than anything I've done professionally in years. That's wonderful, Brandon. Really. I'm proud of you. Thanks. I think I needed to see you build something purpose-driven before I could imagine doing it myself. You gave me permission to want more than financial success. We talked for another 20 minutes about his volunteer work, about the foundation, about the ways we were both trying to align our professional lives with deeper values. When we hung up, I felt grateful for the relationship we'd built, for the honesty that now defined our interactions. The brother who'd once dismissed my work as a hobby was now seeking advice about meaningful contribution. The shift was remarkable not because it was complete but because it was genuine. He wasn't performing growth to impress me. He was actually growing, and he was willing to be vulnerable about the process. The foundation launched 6 months later with a small ceremony at the Evergreen Estate. We'd planned and executed our first 3 events by that point, each one confirming that this work would be emotionally demanding and deeply worthwhile. The first was a wedding for a woman with stage 4 cancer who'd been given months to live. She wanted to marry her partner of 15 years before she died, wanted their children to have the memory of their parents' commitment ceremony. We created something beautiful and intimate, something that honored the joy and the grief existing simultaneously. The woman cried through the entire ceremony, not from sadness but from the overwhelming experience of being seen and celebrated in the midst of terminal illness. That event reminded me why I'd started doing this work in the first place. Not for profit or recognition, but for the privilege of holding space for people's most vulnerable moments. My parents attended the foundation launch, along with most of my extended family. My mother gave a short speech about watching me build something that combined business acumen with compassion, about learning from my example that success could look many different ways. My father stood beside her looking proud in the quiet way he had, and I felt the full weight of their recognition. It had taken years to get here, required confrontation and honesty, and a willingness from all of us to change. But we'd arrived at something real. They saw me now. They understood what I'd built and why it mattered. That understanding felt like a gift I'd stopped expecting to receive. Sophie approached me during the reception that followed the ceremony. She was 11 now, taller and more confident than she'd been 2 years earlier. Aunt Maya. I've been thinking about what I want to do when I grow up. Yeah. What are you considering? I think I want to do something like what you do. Not exactly the same, but something that helps people celebrate important moments. That sounds wonderful. What draws you to that? She thought carefully about her answer. I like how you make people feel like their lives matter. Like their happiness is important enough to plan for. That seems like good work to do. I felt tears threatening and blinked them back. That's exactly what it is, Sophie. Good work that reminds people their lives matter. If you want to do something like that, I think you'd be excellent at it. She beamed at me and ran off to join some cousins, and I stood there feeling the profound responsibility of being seen by someone at the beginning of imagining her future. The example I set, the work I did, it rippled outward in ways I couldn't always track or measure. That 11-year-old was watching, learning, forming ideas about what was possible. I needed to remember that when the work got hard or tedious or overwhelming. The years that followed brought continued growth and the inevitable challenges that accompany sustained success. We expanded into 2 more cities, bringing our total venue count to 8 properties across the West Coast. The team grew to over 100 people, and managing that scale required systems and leadership development that pushed both Rachel and me beyond our comfort zones. We made mistakes, misjudged hires, launched initiatives that failed and had to be restructured. But we also created something enduring, something that employed people well, served clients beautifully, and contributed meaningfully to communities through our foundation work. The business became something bigger than either of us, an entity with its own momentum and identity. My relationship with my family continued evolving in ways that felt sustainable rather than perfect. Brandon and I talked regularly, sometimes about business but increasingly about life beyond work, about parenting and marriage and the ways we were both trying to become better versions of ourselves. My parents visited venues regularly, attending events occasionally, showing genuine interest in the work we did. My mother volunteered with the foundation, helping coordinate logistics for celebration events, bringing her organizational skills and emotional intelligence to work that mattered deeply. She was good at it, and watching her find purpose in supporting what I'd built created a full-circle moment I hadn't anticipated. The woman who'd once worried I was wasting my potential was now actively participating in the realization of that potential. Lisa and I remained close friends, our relationship deepening into something that felt separate from family obligation. She changed careers during this period, leaving her marketing position to start her own consulting firm, focused on helping women negotiate salaries and advocate for themselves in professional settings. I watched her build something from scratch, navigating the fear and uncertainty that comes with entrepreneurship, and I tried to be for her what I'd wished someone had been for me during those early years. A believer, a supporter, someone who saw the potential before the results were visible. She thrived in the new work, finding alignment between her skills and her values in ways her previous career hadn't provided. We celebrated her first major client contract together, and she told me that watching me build milestone events had given her permission to imagine something different for herself. On a cold December evening, 5 years after the vow renewal that had changed everything, my entire family gathered at the Evergreen Estate for an early holiday celebration. It wasn't anyone's birthday or anniversary, just a chance to be together in a space that had become significant to all of us. We ate catered food from one of our preferred vendors, drank wine, told stories, and existed together in a way that felt easy rather than obligated. At one point, Brandon raised his glass and said he wanted to make a toast. We all turned toward him, and he looked directly at me. 5 years ago, I stood in this space and publicly acknowledged that my sister owned the venue where I was renewing my vows. That acknowledgement was one of the hardest and most important things I've ever done. It forced me to confront my own arrogance and the ways I'd underestimated someone I should have been celebrating. Since then, I've watched Maya build something extraordinary. Not just a business, though the business is impressive, but a model for how to live with integrity, how to align work with values, how to be successful without compromising the things that matter most. She's taught all of us, whether we wanted to learn or not, that visibility requires courage, and that being truly seen is worth the discomfort of revelation. So this toast is simple. To Maya, for building something beautiful, for demanding we see you, and for showing us all what's possible when you refuse to shrink. Everyone raised their glasses, and I felt the familiar tightness in my chest that comes with being recognized in exactly the way you've longed for. "Thank you," I said quietly, not trusting myself to say more without crying. We drank together, and the evening continued in its warm, chaotic way. Later, standing alone in the garden where Brandon had renewed his vows 5 years earlier, I thought about everything that had changed. The business had grown beyond anything I'd imagined during those early desperate years. My family had transformed from people who fundamentally misunderstood me into people who actively supported and celebrated what I was building. I'd learned to be visible without apology, to claim my success without diminishing it, to take up space in rooms that had once made me feel small. The journey had been worth every uncomfortable moment, every difficult conversation, every risk I'd taken in revealing who I actually was. Because on the other side of all that discomfort was something I'd stopped believing possible. I was fully seen, accurately known, and genuinely celebrated by the people who mattered most. That felt like the truest definition of success I'd ever encountered. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.